The air is thick and cold, a damp blanket clinging to the hills of eastern France in the late autumn of 1944. It is 0300 hours. The moon, a thin sliver of bone, offers no comfort to the 5 silhouettes moving through the skeletal remains of a burnt-out orchard. They are not soldiers. They are whispers. In the dead center of the column is a woman, perhaps 30, dressed in the rough-spun clothes of a refugee fleeing the collapsing front. Her name, for this operation, is Elise Dubois. Her real name, the one whispered in the high corridors of Baker Street, is Agent Aurore. She is a wireless operator, a crucial, invisible link between the Allied Special Operations Executive, SOE, in London, and the fragmented, desperate cells of the Maquis, the French resistance. What they didn't know, what no one in the Maquis network could possibly have known, was that their supposed safe corridor had become a surgical trap, a snare set not by luck, but by the relentless cold logic of German radiolocation technology. Elise carries 2 burdens, the overwhelming weight of her false identity, and a small, innocuous-looking cloth bag. Inside that bag lies not just a spare sweater and a meager ration, but the lifeblood of their entire operation. A tiny, custom-built B2 Type Mark II radio transceiver, a marvel of miniaturization that weighed under 12 pounds and could transmit a coded message across the channel. It was the industrial scale of this conflict, the immense resources poured into both clandestine operations and their brutal suppression, that would decide her fate. The 5 figures reached the checkpoint, a simple barrier of felled logs across a deserted secondary road, but it is manned by the Feldgendarmerie, the German military police. They reek of certainty and boredom. This is where the narrative's bitter irony begins. Elise, trained for months in silent killing, sabotage, and cryptography, is brought down not by a firefight, but by the mundane mechanism of a papier control, a document check. The officer in charge, Corporal Klaus Richter, is not a member of the Gestapo, nor the SS, but a pale, meticulous man whose war has been fought entirely on paper. He hates the mess of the front and values bureaucratic order above all else. He looks at Elise's forged papers, refugee, divorced mother, traveling to the relative safety of an uncle's farm. It is a perfectly constructed fiction, built by a team of 50 people in London. Richter scans the other 4 men, all authentic resistance fighters, all carrying weapons. They are instantly identified, separated, and disarmed. Elise, the woman, the civilian, is treated differently. Her documents are in order, her performance flawless. She offers the precise, exhausted desperation of a non-combatant. "I am not a spy," she whispers, her French perfect, her eyes meeting his with a practiced, convincing fear. "I am simply trying to reach my family." Richter nods, his expression unreadable. He has seen hundreds like her. He points to the cloth bag. "Open it." She complies, slowly, deliberately. The bag contains the mundane, a loaf of stale bread, a tin of dried meat, a soiled blanket, and beneath it all, the square-shaped, heavily wrapped package containing the B2 radio. This is the pivot point. Her fate hangs not on the radio itself, which looks like a simple bundle of tools, but on the small, almost imperceptible piece of paper, tucked deep inside the rations, a tiny flaw in the fabric of her otherwise perfect cover. Richter's eyes are on the packet. He asks a question about the bread, a banal distraction that serves only to heighten the terror. Then his fingers, pale and thin, reach for the rations. He checks the label, noting the production date, a small but crucial detail in the logistics of war. He smooths out the crinkled wax paper it was wrapped in, and that is when Corporal Richter's face goes utterly pale. It is not the radio that has betrayed her, but a message written in an invisible ink, a microscopic smudge on the wax paper, accidentally transferred from a coded note she had carelessly packed. It is not a code he recognizes, but the chemical residue is immediately apparent to the eye trained to look for everything. A chill, deeper than the autumn night, sinks into her stomach. The great technology of the war, air power, tanks, code breaking, had been momentarily sidelined by a single, catastrophic mistake of pure human fatigue. The game is over. The silence of the night is shattered by the metallic click of a Walther P38 pistol. Elise Dubois, the refugee, is dead. Agent Aurore is now simply a prisoner of war, the most valuable and most dangerous asset the Germans could capture in this quiet sector. I remember the look in his eyes, a former SOE section chief would later recall. Not anger, not triumph. Just a cold, sinking realization of the impossible complexity he had just stumbled into. One woman, a single bag, and an entire European war hanging in the balance. The drama has begun. The soldier, the pale man, is not yet aware that the paper doll in front of him holds secrets that could derail the entire Allied invasion strategy, and that his fate is now inextricably linked to hers. If you are finding this deep dive into the technology and human drama of World War II espionage compelling, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us uncover more of these critical, untold stories from the shadows of history. The moment Corporal Richter's face paled, the reality of the war shifted for everyone involved. For Elise, the sudden clarity of capture was a perverse relief from the crushing pressure of pretense. For Richter, the discovery was a terror far greater than any combat. He had captured a potential enemy agent, an item of priceless strategic value, and the responsibility was immense. The irony of her fate was that her B-2 radio, the instrument of her mission, was secondary to the microscopic trace of chemicals left on the wax paper, a detail only a man obsessed with order could have spotted. Elise's capture was a statistical outlier. The SOE, the secret army of the Allies, had by 1944 infiltrated dozens of agents into occupied territory. Their trade was deception, their currency, information. They were not merely messengers, but tactical engineers, coordinating supply drops, sabotage, and the slow, grinding preparation for the coming invasion. But the enemy was not static. The German intelligence services, the Abwehr and the Sicherheitsdienst, SD, were engaged in a parallel arms race. One fought with specialized technology. Richter's unit was attached to a Funkabwehr, radio defense detachment, operating the dreaded Peilwagen, the radio direction-finding vans. These were technological beasts, bristling with loop antennas, capable of triangulating a B-2's signal within minutes. The SOE's radio discipline required transmission times to be no longer than 20 minutes. The Peilwagen teams were often locating the agent in under 15. The lifespan of a captured SOE agent, once they were forced to play back to London, was tragically brief. Richter, though a simple corporal, was now the gatekeeper to a goldmine. The resistance fighters captured alongside Elise were quickly relegated to the local prison. Elise, however, was flagged for immediate transfer to the infamous Führer School for Counter-Espionage near Freiburg, a site dedicated to the science of extracting secrets. Her journey there was a psychological gauntlet. The German strategy was simple: deny the enemy agent all comfort and all information. She was kept in isolation, moved at night, and subjected to deliberate sensory deprivation. This was the dark side of the technological war, using physiological stressors to break the mind. In Freiburg, she met her interrogator, Major Erich Brandt, a name whispered with a certain cold dread in the clandestine world. Brandt was the architect of the Funkspiel, radio game technique, a master of deception and psychological manipulation. He was not a sadist in the Gestapo mold. He was a clinician of betrayal. His goal was not to make her talk, it was to make her transmit. Brandt knew the statistics. Most agents break, most play back, and most lead to the capture and execution of their entire network. The challenge was convincing London that their agent was still free and functioning. Brandt's greatest weapon was not the rubber truncheon, but the key, the intricate cipher pad unique to Elise, which was now in his possession. He had the B-2 radio, he had her codes, and he had her. Elise's training kicked in. She had been drilled in the 3 cardinal rules. 1. Deny being a spy, claim to be a courier. 2. If forced to transmit, commit a deliberate, subtle error, the security check. 3. Never, under any circumstances, reveal the existence of the security check. Brandt began his careful dance. He showed her the contents of her bag, the radio, the codes. He even produced the wax paper, magnified, showing the telltale residue. He presented the case not as an act of treason, but as a fait accompli. The war is lost, Agent Aurore. Your network is compromised. Help us save lives. Your own and theirs. He played the long game. Instead of torture, he gave her simple comforts. A clean cot, adequate food. He knew that physical pain was often an antidote to guilt, but calculated leniency created a bond of obligation. We know you are brave, Brandt would tell her, with a chilling calmness. But courage is useless against a machine. He demonstrated the Peilwagen's capability, showing her maps with a web of lines converging on the tiny patch of ground where she was captured. This technological display was designed to destroy her faith in her own service. But Elise had a secret of her own, a human element the German technology could not detect, a specific, almost obsessive habit that only a handful of people in London knew. It was a secret born not of training, but of personal trauma, a deeply ingrained subconscious marker she had vowed to use if ever compromised. It was the only card she had left to play against the pale man and his machines, and the only hope for the thousands of resistance fighters waiting for her messages. As Brandt prepared the first playback transmission, Elise knew her moment had arrived. She had to transmit a flawless message to appease the Germans, but introduce her deliberate secret flaw, a flaw so subtle it would bypass Brandt's clinical analysis, yet scream compromised to the two people in London who knew her secret code. The life of her network now depended on the difference between a technical mistake and an act of genius. The interrogation room was stark, sterile, and unforgivingly bright. It was a laboratory of coercion, entirely lacking the theatrical menace of the Gestapo cellars. Major Brandt, leaning back, offered Elise a cup of Ersatzkaffee, a meager but deliberate gesture of false humanity. The focus was the key. The SOE used a one-time pad cipher system, a theoretically unbreakable method where a unique randomized key was used only once. The sheer volume of pads required for every agent was an industrial challenge in itself, printed on silk and often concealed in the bindings of books or the soles of shoes. Elise's current pad, miraculously, had remained undiscovered among the chaos of her capture. Brandt, however, was confident. The B2 radio, Elise's captured message drafts, and her call sign, Aurore, were sufficient for a masterful Funkspiel. His team had broken the patterns of previous captured agents. They knew the lingo, the rhythms, and the common security pitfalls. They did not need the key to send a simple, believable message, only to receive one. "We will send a message to London," Brandt stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "It will be a simple status report. The network is operational, the drop zone is clear. If you cooperate, the message is clean. If you resist, your capture will be announced, and your 4 compatriots will be executed immediately, here, in the courtyard." This was the core of Brandt's genius, the immediate, measurable human cost. Elise knew he was not bluffing. Her 4 captured companions had lives, families, and were prepared to die, but their execution served no strategic purpose, unless it was to pressure her. Elise's mind raced through her training. The official SOE security check, the deliberately introduced error, such as reversing 2 letters or omitting a punctuation mark, was notoriously unreliable. Many agents, under extreme stress, forgot the check entirely. Others were so subtle that the operator in London dismissed it as a simple transmission error. The Funkspiel specialists knew what to look for, often intercepting the compromised message before it even reached London. But then, she remembered her true, unauthorized safety net, the deep personal habit she had cultivated. Before her mission, during a week of intense coding practice, she had shared a specific private detail with her 2 supervising officers. Her tendency to always end a transmission with a single, unique, and entirely unnecessary click of the radio key, a full 3 seconds after the final coded letter. This phantom click was a manifestation of her nervous tic, a tiny, almost inaudible stutter of her finger that only 2 people in the world had noticed and documented. It was a purely human error, a flaw of muscle memory that London had agreed to accept as her genuine security check. If the transmission ended cleanly, without the click, it meant she was under duress. If the click was there, It meant she was transmitting freely. The brilliant irony was that Brandt would expect a mistake within the message. Elise would provide the betrayal after the message was complete. Brandt's operator, Sergeant Kroll, a young man whose face was etched with the intensity of focusing on pure signal, began to prepare the B-2. It was a technical ballet. Kroll adjusted the quartz crystal, checked the antenna wire, and tuned the dial to the precise, prearranged frequency. Elise dictated the message, a routine signal confirming the receipt of funds and a proposed new rendezvous point. Kroll keyed it in, his finger tapping out the sharp, precise Morse code. The B-2 hummed, sending the encrypted message across the channel at the speed of light. Elise watched Kroll's finger. As the final letter, I, was sent, Kroll lifted his hand cleanly, efficiently, and turned to Brandt with a satisfied nod. The transmission was perfect. Brandt smiled, a flicker of genuine relief. Excellent, Agent Aurore. You have chosen wisely. But as the airwaves went silent, and before the receiver could be switched off, Elise made a choice that would define her mission. With a practiced, yet exhausted movement, she subtly brushed her sleeve against the radio key, not forcefully enough to create a character, but just enough to produce that deep, resonant, and entirely silent phantom click. A single, unauthorized, electrical hiccup. It was an act of pure, desperate genius. It was a sound that meant nothing to Brandt. It was a betrayal that only two men, 1,000 miles away, would understand. The message had been sent, the Nazis were satisfied, but the ghost of her nervous tick, a tiny pulse of electrical current, had screamed the truth across the entire European continent. I am compromised. Do not answer. The deception was now doubled. Brandt believed he had secured a pipeline into the SOE. Elise knew she had just sacrificed herself, but potentially saved her entire network. The wait began for London's response, a period of excruciating silence that would test the limits of Brandt's patience and Elise's resolve. Across the black, turbulent waters of the English Channel, in the subterranean nerve center of the SOE's communications wing, two men sat in a claustrophobic, soundproofed room. They were Major Alistair Thorne, Elise's former instructor, and Sergeant Wallace, the chief listening operator, the two men privy to the secret of the phantom click. The air in the listening room was heavy with stale tobacco smoke and the relentless static of the ether. The communication logs, the vast industrial record of every coded whisper from occupied Europe, were stacked precariously high. Every message was a life, a mission, a point on a strategic map. At 04:15 hours, the signal from Aurore was logged. Western France. Grid Alpha 7. Message. The schedule is accepted. Prepare. Drop Zone Operation Cassini. Wallace decoded the message. It was clean. Too clean. The technical precision was impeccable, the phrasing exactly what was expected. It indicated success. Routine, sir, Wallace muttered, sliding the decoded message across the table to Thorne. Thorne, a man whose face was permanently tired from the weight of sending agents to their potential deaths, scanned the text. He noted the call sign, the time, and the frequency. Every SOE message was judged on an almost intuitive level, a blend of technical analysis and human instinct. But it was the audio record that mattered. Wallace cued the playback of the raw transmission tape. The familiar rhythmic tapping of the Morse code filled the room. The tempo was right, the pressure on the key correct. It was unmistakably the touch of a human operator, not a machine. The message ended. Silence. Then, 3 seconds later, the faint, yet unmistakable sound. A singular muffled click. It was an anomaly, an electrical spike that did not translate into a coded character. A sound so subtle it would have been filtered out by any standard military receiver. Thorne froze. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk. He had spent months trying to train Elise out of that habit, that faint muscular stutter that was a holdover from a childhood accident, the deep, unconscious tick that only manifested under specific forms of high concentration. He looked at Wallace, the silent keeper of the logs. "Run it again, Wallace. Just the end." Wallace, a man of unflappable calm, rewound the tape. They listened. The final I, the silence, and the tiny, almost musical click. Wallace, without a word, drew a heavy red circle around the log entry and scrawled a single word: doubt. "It's the click," Thorne said, his voice a low, painful rasp. "It's her. She was never supposed to transmit that if she was free. It's the phantom check." The irony was now crushing. Elise had successfully sent the Germans a perfectly plausible message, but she had simultaneously sent London a personal, agonizing scream for help. The enemy was listening, and their greatest success was predicated on believing this message was genuine. The dilemma was catastrophic. If they ignored the message, the Germans would know they had been discovered, and Elise's life, and that of her captured network, would be over immediately. If they replied, they risked feeding Brandt and his Funkspiel team a priceless stream of false information, effectively turning Aurora into a German asset, a paper doll being manipulated to destroy the entire French resistance infrastructure. The decision had to be made in the high-stakes arena of strategic deception. Thorne was immediately called before the Joint Intelligence Committee, JIC. The stakes were astronomical. The Normandy landings, Operation Overlord, were now only months away. Any false information regarding resistance activity could compromise the entire strategy of diversion and sabotage. The JIC debated the technical merit of the phantom click. Was it truly a deliberate check, or just an electrical surge, a quirk of the damaged B2 radio? The debate was fierce, historical precedent weighing heavily. The SOE had lost several networks due to German Funkspiel operations, but Thorne argued for the human element. "I know her discipline, gentlemen." That sound is a scar on her consciousness. It is a genuine, non-technical cry for help. It means she is compromised, but willing to play back. The verdict, hammered out in a tense 15-minute session, was a masterpiece of cold, strategic calculation. The Germans must be allowed to believe they have succeeded. The JIC decided to initiate Operation Nightingale. London would send a reply, a seemingly routine acknowledgement, but it would be the first step in a deep, calculated game of disinformation. Aurora would now become a meticulously controlled source of Allied lies. Thorne was given the task of drafting the response, a message so carefully crafted that it would reassure Brandt while simultaneously providing a microscopic, unencrypted cue, a subtle error in the message header, that only Elise, if she was permitted to read the incoming transmission, would understand. Elise's fate was sealed. She was no longer an agent. She was a paper doll of strategic importance, her existence a calculated risk that could save the entire invasion. The Germans had the radio, but London had the subtle, terrifying truth. Back in Freiburg, Major Brandt was smugly satisfied. London had replied within the expected time frame, their message brief and perfectly professional. Roger, Aurora. Funds received. Proceed Cassini as planned. "They have swallowed it," Brandt told Elise, his smile thin and precise. "You see? They do not care about you, only about the message." Elise, having anticipated the strategy, feigned a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had to maintain the charade, the compliant, broken agent who was now willing to cooperate to save her own life. But the terror was still palpable. She knew the danger of the Funkspiel. Every piece of information she relayed now served the German war machine. Yet, Brandt made a small, critical mistake. In his zeal to demonstrate the futility of her resistance, he permitted her to see the entire incoming communication log, including the unencrypted header information. This included the seemingly random 5-letter group that preceded the actual message, GTKAZ. This header was normally a routine procedural code, but to Elise, it was a thunderclap. GTKAZ was the mnemonic for an obscure, non-military training exercise she had run with Thorne months before. A drill code that meant game, true, keep, all, 0. In short, London knows you are compromised, but we are playing along. Do not give away any genuine secrets. Her relief was a profound, silent wave. They had seen the click. She was a captured asset. But London was now directing her from the outside, using the German pipeline to their advantage. The mirror game began. Brandt and Elise started their collaboration, preparing a series of urgent messages designed to lure Allied supply drops into German ambushes and to feed disinformation about resistance strength and target priorities. The deception was layered and intricate. London's strategy, orchestrated by Major Thorne, was to provide just enough actionable, low-value intelligence to keep Brandt happy, while building a massive campaign of high-level lies. For instance, Elise would transmit a fabricated target list for a resistance sabotage team, say, a small secondary rail bridge in the south, while London's real resistance assets were preparing to hit the main rail artery in the north. Brandt was an intellectual, not a butcher. He saw this as a war of pure intellect. He began to value Elise's subtle input on the resistance mindset, unknowingly using her real expertise to craft his own deception. "Your people would never accept a mission without a supply drop first," Elise suggested one afternoon, deliberately feeding him a truism. "They are short on explosives." Brandt noted it down. The next message Aurora sent to London requested a drop of plastic explosives at a specific, German-controlled location. London, in turn, confirmed the drop. But instead of sending explosives, they sent propaganda leaflets and deliberately damaged radios, worthless items that cost the Allies nothing, but satisfied Brandt's need for proof that the line was real. The tension was the constant possibility of exposure. Brandt's team was always testing her. They would ask her to send a slightly off message, one that contradicted a detail from a previous transmission, just to see if she corrected it. A classic interrogator's trick. Elise, however, had the advantage of the secret header code. She knew the game was being played from both ends. One day, Brandt presented her with a complex, highly specific request. The Allies wanted information about a new German radar installation on the coast of Brittany, a crucial piece of the Atlantic Wall's defense. Brandt's eyes were sharp. This was a critical test. "The Allies must believe this is your own initiative," he instructed. "We will provide you with a forged schematic, deliberately flawed, of course, and you will transmit it." Elise knew this was the ultimate trap. Her compliance was necessary, but the information must be compromised in a way that would be convincing to London's analysts without alerting Brandt. The technological details were critical. The German radar, the Wassermann M, was a long-range early warning system. Brandt gave her a schematic that overstated the range by 10%. A small, believable lie. Elise studied the schematic. She dictated the message, describing the radar site. But as she dictated the accompanying specifications, she introduced her own, non-coded deception, a deliberate, technical error that she knew would immediately be flagged by London's intelligence experts, a flaw in the language of engineering that the civilian Brandt would never grasp. She described the Wassermann's antenna not as a dipole array, but as a parabolic reflector. A dipole array looks like a metal fence. A parabolic reflector is a dish. The difference was massive. It was a technical impossibility for the Wassermann M, a mistake a high-level SOE agent, especially one tasked with detailed reconnaissance, would never make. Brandt was satisfied. He had successfully transmitted a piece of misleading high-level intelligence. But in London, Major Thorne would see the message, Wassermann M, parabolic reflector. He would recognize the impossible technical error, the deliberate insertion of wrong terminology, and know that Agent Aurora had just sent him the ultimate signal. The data is forged, the source is German, and I am still in play. Elise had gambled her life on the fact that her enemy valued strategic deception over technical accuracy. It was a victory of human insight over cold military science. The psychological toll of the mirror game was relentless. Elise was forced to live a double life within her captivity. She was the compliant collaborator for Brandt, a living source of false hope for the Germans. Yet, in the silent language of her transmissions, she was still fighting for the Allies. But every message she sent carried the weight of real lives. The German strategy of using Aurora to draw out Allied assets eventually had its horrific impact. Following a message fabricated by Brandt and dutifully transmitted by Elise under the strict supervision of the GTKAZ mandate, an Allied supply plane, attempting a low-altitude drop, was ambushed. The airmen were killed, and the cargo, mostly propaganda and dummy supplies, was recovered by the Wehrmacht. When Brandt showed Elise the photos of the destroyed aircraft and the bodies of the airmen, he did not gloat. He used it as proof of her complicity. "Your friends are dead, Agent Aurora. You sent them to their fate. We are on the same side now, the side of survival. The emotional devastation was almost complete. Elise was facing a moral equation. Her betrayal of a handful of lives was the price for protecting the entire resistance structure, and ultimately, the success of the Normandy invasion. It was a choice no soldier should have to make. Brandt, noticing the break in her composure, pressed his advantage.
He decided to leverage Aurore's success for his own promotion and a crucial shift in German counterintelligence strategy. He wanted to use the Funkspiel not just to capture agents, but to fundamentally alter the Allied perception of the Atlantic Wall. He began planning the Great Lie, a series of messages from Aurore confirming that the primary invasion point would be at the Pas-de-Calais, the shortest distance across the Channel, and that the German defenses there were hopelessly weak.
This was the ultimate misdirection, designed to support Hitler's already biased belief in the Pas-de-Calais invasion. To make the lie convincing, Brandt needed the message to be perfect, both in content and transmission. He knew the Allies were paranoid about the keying style, the unique rhythm of an operator's tapping. Any deviation, a key held too long, a pause too short, could expose the deception. He brought in a specialist, a captured French telegrapher who had been turned by the SD. Jacques, a man whose face was gaunt with fear and guilt, was tasked with perfectly mimicking Elise's keying style. "Send the message, Agent Aurore," Brandt commanded, handing her the lengthy, detailed cipher sheet. "Your hand is shaking. Let the expert send it this time. For the sake of authenticity." This was the final technical test. Elise had to maintain her mask of cooperation while finding a way to betray the message, even as a collaborator sent it. The irony was acute. The Germans' pursuit of technical perfection was about to be undone by a single tiny human factor, the B-2's antenna connection. The B-2 radio, for all its technical brilliance, was a field machine, often requiring slight adjustment to its antenna wire for optimal transmission. Elise had developed a habit of subtly tightening the small thumbscrew at the base of the antenna after every 5 minutes of operation to ensure a clean signal. It was a technical necessity she had made a tactical signal. As Jacques sat down, Brandt watching intently, Elise offered a simple, non-threatening piece of advice. "The set is cold, Sergeant. The line voltage fluctuates when cold. The antenna connection will be loose. It must be perfectly tight." She reached out, and with a practiced, deliberate movement, made a quarter-turn adjustment to the thumbscrew. Brandt saw only an agent helping to perfect the transmission. What Brandt did not know was that in a message exceeding 3 minutes, a perfectly tightened screw would cause a barely noticeable fade-out in the signal strength after 4 minutes and 58 seconds, a technical flaw she had discovered and noted during her training. A tightened screw, ironically, was the final stage of her true security check. The message began, a long, complex cipher confirming the Pas-de-Calais preparations. Jacques' tapping was perfect, Elise's rhythm flawlessly mimicked. Brandt beamed. 4 minutes and 58 seconds in, the signal transmission began its barely audible, subsonic degradation, a telltale signature that London, equipped with highly sensitive spectrum analyzers, would immediately detect. It was a betrayal transmitted not by code, but by the physics of radiomechanics. Elise had sacrificed her soul to send the message, but she had ensured that Major Thorne in London would receive a massive 5-minute lie that came with an inaudible yet screaming header. "It is a lie! The screw is tight." The Germans had the volume. The Allies had the tiny, critical key. In the final days leading up to Operation Overlord, the Funkspiel of Agent Aurore reached its fever pitch. Major Brandt was ecstatic. His stream of false intelligence had been so convincing that the German High Command had diverted 2 panzer divisions and several crack infantry regiments to bolster the defenses around Pas-de-Calais. Brandt was convinced he was single-handedly winning the intelligence war. He was rewarded with a promotion and orders to travel to Berlin to brief the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, on the technical triumph of the Aurora network. Elise, the paper doll, had served her purpose. The climax arrived on the night of June 5, 1944. Brandt was traveling by staff car toward Berlin, reveling in his success. Back in Freiburg, Elise was locked in her cell, Believing her mission of deception was complete, her life now a countdown to execution. Across the Channel, the actual invasion fleet was sailing toward the beaches of Normandy. The twist of fate arrived in the form of a rogue element, Corporal Klaus Richter. The Pale Man, the meticulous bureaucrat who had first captured Elise, was an obsessive note-taker. He had documented every single transmission, every coded letter, and every technical anomaly. In the vastness of the German military machine, Richter was a non-entity, but his curiosity was his undoing. Comparing the raw audio logs of the recent long-form transmissions with the very first message, the one that had contained the phantom click, Richter noticed the subtle engineered flaw. The keying style was identical, the content was plausible, but the sound profile was different. The final, subtle fade-out of the signal strength was a technical pattern Richter had not seen in the earlier short transmissions. He was not an intelligence officer, but a technical specialist. To him, the fade-out was a deliberate manipulation of the antenna connection. Richter, driven by his pathological need for order, concluded that Aurore was not merely a captured agent, she was a double agent, and Major Brandt was either incompetent or a traitor. It was a colossal, but ultimately accurate leap of faith. He acted on his own, a footnote in the grand strategic narrative. Using his limited technical privileges, Richter sent a cryptic, low-priority internal signal to the SD headquarters in Paris, citing a technical irregularity in the Aurore network. He was not exposing the double cross, merely questioning the system's technical security. The signal was immediately intercepted by a low-level Allied listening station, a fluke of circumstance. The message was forwarded to Major Thorne in London. Thorne saw the signal. Freiburg, technical irregularity, Aurore network. The source was a corporal's log. It meant the Germans were about to detect the double cross. The window was closing. At 0630 hours on June 6th, as the first American troops hit Omaha Beach, Thorne sent his final, most dangerous message to Aurora. It was a direct instruction, not a game of deception. The message contained only 2 letters, disguised as a mundane inventory query. MOVE. In Freiburg, the message was decoded and handed to a junior officer. It made no sense. Why would London ask about inventory now? The junior officer was directed to show the message to Elise. She looked at the 2 letters. Move. She understood. The invasion had begun. Her deception had held long enough. Simultaneously, Major Brandt's car was stopped on the Autobahn, intercepted by a field unit of the SD, triggered by Richter's internal signal. Brandt was arrested on suspicion of strategic incompetence and failure to detect counter-deception. The man who had convinced his superiors of his genius was now a suspected traitor, brought down by the one low-level technician who valued technical accuracy over strategic success. The massive Allied deception, orchestrated through Elise's tiny, deliberate flaws, the click, the technical impossibility, the tightened screw, had held. The German divisions were pinned down hundreds of miles from the actual invasion zone, waiting for a phantom invasion at Pas-de-Calais. Elise's fate, however, was still grim. With the invasion underway, the German security apparatus would clean house. Her utility was over. The fate of Agent Aurora remains partially obscured by the classification walls of the post-war intelligence services. What is known is that in the chaotic days following D-Day, with Allied bombing destroying German infrastructure, the security detail at Freiburg collapsed. In the ensuing confusion, utilizing the single word MOVE as her final command, Elise organized a daring escape, vanishing into the collapsing networks of the remaining resistance. She was one of the few high-value Funkspiel agents to survive the war. The story of the Pale Man, Corporal Klaus Richter, is a study in bureaucratic irony. He was eventually vindicated, his technical analysis of the B2 signal recognized as correct, though his accusation against Brandt was dismissed as professional jealousy. Richter was, in the end, a technician, incapable of grasping the human-driven double-cross. He was an observer, not a participant, and he survived the war with his ledger intact. Decades later, in 1968, a retired Corporal Richter, then working as an accountant in Frankfurt, wrote a short, anonymous memoir for a German veterans journal. His passage on the capture of a female agent in 1944 is chilling. It was the wax paper, not the radio. The simplest thing betrayed her, and the most complex thing saved her. We were ready for the codes, for the discipline, for the technology, but we were never ready for the small, deeply human flaws. Her final betrayal was not the message she sent, but the sound of the equipment failing in a way only a lover of the machine would understand. The legacy of Agent Aurore, Elise Dubois, is not in a grand statue or a public ceremony. Her valor is buried in the dry, declassified reports of the SOE. The paper doll was instrumental in saving thousands of lives and ensuring the success of the most critical military operation in modern history. Her story is a testament to the technological arms race of World War II, where the ingenuity of the engineer was constantly trumped by the resilience of the human spirit. She proved that the perfect machine can always be undermined by the perfect, deliberate imperfection. The click, the wrong technical word, the tightened screw, these tiny human errors were the most powerful weapons wielded in the War of Shadows. Major Thorne, who carried the burden of sending his agent into the deadly mirror game, eventually met Elise years after the war. The reunion was silent, marked only by the devastating understanding of the price they had both paid in the currency of lies. The true battles of World War II were often not fought on the muddy fields of Normandy, but in the soundless static of the airwaves, between a pale man obsessed with order and a woman who gambled her life on a nervous twitch. Her life was the final message, and the silence that followed was her ultimate victory. If the secrets of the intelligence war and the sacrifices of the forgotten heroes of World War II intrigue you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Tell us in the comments what other untold story of technology and courage we should explore next.